Hi, everybody. This is being recorded. And I would like to say hello to everyone. And it's really nice to see some familiar faces, some people that I've seen in the DEI circle. Thank you for joining us today. And for all of those who are new, welcome. And I hope that you enjoy our conversation on this Friday morning. I will invite you to use, if possible, your chat as often as you like to either react to some of the content that we will have today or to ask your questions that we will try to get to as soon as possible to make sure that the idea is still fresh in the head. Before we dive into what it is building a workplace for the future and what does inclusive culture and inclusive leadership practices look like, I would like to take some time to ask all of you to close your eyes and let me just see. There you go. Okay, we're working. Yes, so I would invite you to close your eyes and to think about the land that you're on today and how you're arriving to this meeting. I would like to acknowledge that I'm coming in from Jajake, and that is Montreal, and it is situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka. It is a place that has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among many First Nations, including the Kanien'kehá:ka of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, the Abenaki, and the Anishinaabe. Giving thanks to the custodians of the lands on which we walk and we gather is nothing without the recognition and the reparation of the past and ongoing oppression of First Nations peoples across the continent at the hands of systems built by colonizers and reinforced by settlers for generations. I want you to think about how the land that you're on, the people that have cultivated it, the people that have walked on it, nourished it, sang to it, danced on it, loved it, secured it, protected it, how they left it to you, and what are you doing today that is also nurturing it, protecting it, singing to it, and loving it so that you may pass it down to your descendants, to the future that you're building for them. What has it given you that you are able to give back? I want you to imagine that you're bare feet on the ground right now. What does it feel like to you? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it hard? Do you feel strong? Do you feel like a tree? Thank you so much, everyone, for taking that small journey with us. Although it may be brief, the work that we have for reconciliation here in Canada, but also on the continent, is a long one and not an easy one, but it is something that we all need to band together to do. All right. Our introductions today. I'm going to ask you to, in the chat, to take a moment and write down your name, your role in your organization, where you're coming in from, how you're arriving, what's your energy level this morning? Do you feel grounded? Do you feel stressed, tired? And I also want you to share with us what is something that people get wrong about you? What is a misconception people have of you? And why do you think that is? So take some time to think about it and drop it in the chat. I'll go first. My name is Dahrima Habib. I am a facilitator and a consultant in DEI, culture, and capacity building for mission-driven organizations in Montreal and Canada. I am arriving today very relaxed. I was able to sneak in a workout this morning, so I'm coming very grounded and energetic. Something that people get wrong about me is that because I am a bubbly person, that I have no physical boundaries, that I'm always up for a hug. And actually, I do very much enjoy my professional and personal boundaries of like, I don't like getting hugs from colleagues or people outside of my family. And it's very hard for me to get to that space with them. And because of just my attitude and how I present myself, people seem to kind of gloss over, oh, you know what, you look like you need a hug. Like, let's go in for it. A lot of personal touch, which I don't enjoy. So that's something people get wrong about me when they see or experience me. So let's see on the chat, how are some of you? Oh, I hear that the audio is choppy. Is the audio okay now? Great.
I think it's yeah, it gets a little choppy at times, and other times it's fine. I think it's kind of coming in and out.
All right. I'll try to stay closer to the monitor then. Thank you for letting me know. All right. So we got some answers coming in. A lot of energy from Daryl. I love it. Thank you. It's hard to think about what kind of first impressions we have on people, because sometimes we don't really stop to think about or ask or notice what they're doing. Is it something that they're responding to from our behavior? And if so, do we like it? Do we not like it? What's going on? It is a very, it's not a reflection we make all the time, because either we're around people all the time, or in the past 2 years, we're not around people at all. So this is a good exercise for you to think about. Am I being seen the way that I think I'm presenting myself, or the way that I like being seen? And if not, how is it different from who I am and what I like? John, great to see your role as a grandpa and a friend. Thank you for sharing that. I appear to be around people all the time. Yeah. But so people think that you're an introvert, or they think you're an extrovert because you're around people?
I am an introvert. I really don't like being around people. And I'm always around people.
I see. All right. Well, it comes with the job, right?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for sharing. So you can keep thinking about it and dropping it into the chat so that everyone can see where you're coming in from. I got coming in some stuff here. People get wrong about me is that I don't worry about a lot of things because I'm an extrovert and I come across with a lot of confidence. Yeah. Yeah, that happens a lot. As soon as you talk a little bit more than other people, are like, oh my God, how do you do it? I get that. My ability to feel people, because people are not used to be seen for who they really are. Yeah, that's a nice one. Thanks everyone for sharing all of those. I hope you take the time to read what people are sharing in the chat as well. So today we're going to be diving into workplace. We're going to look a little bit before we dive into our content about workplace balance sheet. I don't know how many organizations have had the time to actually sit down and let's say for an annual ops gathering, to sit down and think about like, what is our company input? And does it actually match, or is it something that will render the output from our employees that we're looking for? So when I talk about company input, I'm looking, when I go into organizations, at are the values that are stuck on your website and written across your walls or put on a pamphlet when you recruit, are those values operationalized within the processes of your organization, within the actual policies that are that pretty much dictate all decisions that are going to be made? Do you have an inclusive and mindful culture? And inclusive and mindful, they're like, oh yeah, sure, like popular words, but what do they mean to you? Not like, I read it in a catalog the other day, and I think that we can qualify our culture as mindful and inclusive, but what does it mean to you, and how do you practice it? Support and capacity informed structure. So when we think about like a hierarchical structure in a lot of organizations, it's top down, right? How is information being conveyed? How is power being shared? All of that is top down. And so where are the support systems? Where are the structures of support that people who don't necessarily have the same degree of information, how are they able to do their jobs? And so once you have the input set in place, when you set the stage, you also have the employee output. What are the employees then experiencing and therefore bringing back to you and giving back to you? And that's a positive and purposeful attitude. When their work is aligned with the mission, and their mission of your organization is clearly in view, then positivity and purposefulness and something being fulfilled will exhibit in your employees. And the attitude will then show the quality of the work that they do for you and for themselves, because they're a sense of belonging there. The quality product of service. Yeah, so that's just it. The more that they're motivated to think about the culture and also the mission, and the more that they feel like there's a sense of belonging and purpose, then the work that they do will be masterful. And healthy and honest boundaries. So staff having boundaries is not a bad thing. It's actually what is conducive to having better regulated emotional responses, better regulated responses in times of crises, clear thought, and also relationship building and trust are also present when healthy boundaries are also present in the workspace. So now that we know a little bit about what goes into building inclusion within your organization from the organization, and what the employees can bring once they experience it, let's move a little bit to sometimes what can hinder it and what can hinder that relationship of trust. But by behaviors and that exhibit and we can see, but also from behaviors that exhibit but we don't understand why. And that happens when we go to bias. So how many of you, just by a show of hands, or if your camera is off, by just the emoji with like a reaction emoji, if you can tell me how many of you have actually seen the tree metaphor, for whether it's bias, whether it's oppression, but to have used the tree metaphor before. No? Let's see. All right, Katarina. Stephanie. Great. So that's fun. We're going to have something new to explore today. And so the tree metaphor is used in anti-oppression work and to actually more for teaching and training anything that has to do with NTO. And it's really to show how at the tree, when you look from the top, let's say you're looking from eagle eye view, and what you see on the surface is the tree's leaves, everything that is visible to you. And then what you see, what you don't see, but is there holding those visible trees up is the trunk of the tree and the branches. And what you absolutely don't see, but is what is nourishing the tree and keeping it alive are the roots. So when we look at this through the perspective of anti-oppression, whether it be when we talk about racism, sexism, discrimination, homophobia, here we're looking at a bias. Where does bias come from? What does it look like? When we look at the surface of the leaves, we can see bias as profiling, chaos, there's discrimination, violence, whiteness, superiority. All of those are what is completely visible. What holds up those behaviors, what holds up what we can see is the trunk, it's the strength part of it. What gives this tree the strength is divisive narrative, messaging, hierarchy, the structure that we build, xenophobic media. What are we hearing? What are we constantly listening to that reinforces us keeping this tree up, keeping our biases strong? And then when we go down under the ground to see the roots of it, like what's causing us to have these biases, what's causing us to exhibit not only the behaviors, but also to uphold the behaviors. Those are systematic cultures, right? Like complete narratives, but not just narratives, but like collective beliefs of something. That could be structural oppression, fear, hate, disrespect, ignorance. All of those are at the root of what we see as bias and what can exhibit as bias. Then we have on the other side, on your right side, the unconscious bias tree. These are things that you can't see directly because they're not necessarily physically done. They're very quick, they're subtle, because they're unconscious. You just like, oh, it's just like, oh, I just reacted to something. And from the surface, what those subtle reactions look like are disdain. People can't show, or like you can't spot disdain on someone's face, but it's what they feel when they are exposed to a situation. Apathy, concerns. What are those concerns founded on? Stereotypes, neglect, misunderstanding, tokenism. All of those are subtle things that happen, that are actions and feelings that are at the surface, and they're held up by segregation, lack of accountability, working in silos, so never exploring other perspectives. And the root of unconscious bias looks a lot like lack of exposure. You've only been ever in a small neighborhood, only knew 400 people in your village or in your town, and you've never stepped outside. You don't know, you haven't experienced it. Stereotypes, stereotyping people you don't know, that's xenophobia. Preconceptions of people, like, oh, they must be like this because that one time. And inferences. So when we talk about, we want to root out bias in our workplaces, like we can't, because our biases are actually based, whether they're overt bias or they're covert and unconscious bias. They're built and they're reinforced, but they're also nourished by unseen and untouchable circumstances, untouchable experiences that have built on top of each other. So like baggages, right? So you just keep adding a baggage for every time on a baggage. Like let's say when you're traveling and you would put a tag on the bag, every time you've been exposed to a situation and it didn't go well, that's a tag that you put on your bag and be like, I'm building a bias against it. So having biases is normal and natural, and it's everybody has them. And a lot of the time biases are learned to protect yourself. And a lot of times biases are actually meant to keep like-minded people together because it's safe. You feel heard, you feel seen because people get you. So the less you expose yourself to challenging perspectives, the more you keep those biases and the more you're encouraged to act on the biases as soon as a challenge comes up. Does everybody now kind of understand the metaphor? Does it work for you? Can you drop in the chat, maybe like from 1 to 5, 1 being, I don't get it, and 5 being, I totally get it, I can even use it. Where are we on the tree metaphor? On what is the surface, what holds it up, and what really invisibly drives and nourishes these acts of oppression? What are we seeing? 4, 5. Y'all are catching on real fast. That's great. All right. Great. So what can we do about bias and what does it affect? So here, bias happens in the brain. We're thinking about it. It's not like thoughts we can just hold, swat, put it in a little bag and close it up. It will happen to you. But how our biases then move towards our values, right? So like in the center, we have like care and justice and innovation and collaboration being values. When we have our biases affect those values and gnawing at them, they also translate to just the structure and the organization and the relationship we build with our staff as well. So they affect reaction to criticism, right? Your biases, if you're in a situation, if your baggage is that you have been looked down on, when you enter a workspace and you receive criticism for the first time, you immediately think like, oh my God, this is a personal attack, right? Reaction to expressed needs. When you have stereotypes guiding you, when someone tells you they need a day off, you're like, it's because they're lazy. It's because they want to slack off. You don't understand how to necessarily mitigate or accept or even ask further questions to understand and be empathetic towards other people's needs. Your bias and how you act on it affects also how you share power and resources with your colleagues, with your staff, with people around you, and providing fair performance evaluations. In a workplace setting, performance appraisals, a lot of the times, they're very standardized, they're like very inhumane because of how much, as we try to like make them more humane, if depending on the culture we're in, it can come off very biased. And rolling out promotions. That's a lot of the things that we see also when you have biases, like how are you moving people ahead? Is it leaning into your biases and trying to find people who are like you, who will say yes to you, who will agree with you? Or are you rolling out promotions because you want to welcome challenges? You want to see what's out there. You want to change your mind sometimes too, and you're open to that. In the last 2 years, we have experienced collectively as a world a lot. 2 years of disconnection, right? Connecting through Zoom, through any kind of video conference. Although that has changed a lot of the ways that we do things, it has molded our experience of what connection means. How do we connect? How do we go to work? But also, how do we balance things? It surfaced new needs for us. A lot of us changed careers. I know I did. I completely changed my career around. And we all shared in a common sense of loss and grief when we lost what connection used to look like, what our lives 2000, like pre-2020 March looked like. But a lot of us also faced deaths. We lost friends and family, loved ones. We lost close people that were our chosen families too. We changed the way that we saw responsibility as a person, as a human. And now, going back, we've also built a lot of different new biases because of the media, because what we heard, because what was happening. You know, people turning against each other, all of the hate crimes that happened against Asians, that shaped a lot of narratives. Some of us, it shaped it so that we're become more outspoken after the death of the murder of George Floyd, after the uprising and the incredible seeking of accountability for not just government, but also to organizations and companies who say they care, to show that they care and show us their receipts of what it is like. There's a lot of action that happened. There's a lot of change that was called for. But the media also, in reporting it, created a lot of silos where hatred and oppression and, you know, negative feeling towards others and xenophobia were also reinforced as well. Many realities existed in this time. Many realities we're still facing with them. We're still unlearning. We're still learning new tools. So how are we creating this space at work where in our lived experiences in the last 2 years that uprooted our lives, how do we bring that back if we're expected to bring that back to an office, to colleagues now? When we talk about bias and leadership and how we bring people back together and how we lead people, specifically thinking about DEI and belonging and justice, we're looking at how our biases, when they go unaddressed, what does it lead to? Sometimes, I mean, most of the time when we look at biases and we think about like racial people, marginalized people, and like people with disability, there is a desensitization to other people's needs, right? I have my biases. I have learned things that I strongly believe, and I have had trunks and media reinforce those thoughts. So I'm going to act on them. I'm not going to ask myself questions. I'm going to act on them. And what does that lead to? Desensitization. And that looks like color blindness. I'm trying to be super inclusive. I don't see color. So everybody has the same needs and we're all starting from ground zero. But that's not the case. There's no actual process behind it. The intention is tainted. The intention to be inclusive and to say you want to be inclusive is tainted by your lack of trying and lack of action to actually get to inclusivity, even equity if possible. It reduces empathy. You have an aversion to accountability. You're inflexible. There's a high resistance to change, especially when it comes from your employees. So bottom up. And harmful leadership and executive practices. So how are you communicating with your environment, with your organization, even with your beneficiaries, your participants? What does that look like if you don't check your biases, if you don't ask yourself questions? Ultimately, it removes the room that you would have created for culture change work to happen. And we can't sit here in a room talking about DEI and not reflect that so many calls for culture change has happened in the last 2 years in so many different aspects of our lives, that not changing is not a choice. Like it's not actually an alternative. We have to change. So what do we do about this? And how do we check our biases? And what part does biases have to play in us moving forward? Alternatively, when we think about actually addressing your biases, so taking a time to ask yourself some questions and work through what you're doing and analyze your behaviors, we see that when you address your biases, you go to openness to continuous learning. You want to ask questions, but you also want people to ask you questions. You want people to answer honestly, give you some resources, or you yourself will find resources to continue your learning. Increased empathy. You're more flexible. You understand people are coming from different places because you take the time to ask, to notice, to question. And the metrics for accountability, you actually lay out metrics. It's not like, how do you think I'm doing? No, it's when I did this, what could I have done in this moment that would make it better? If you gave me a grade out of from 1 to 10 on the last time I hosted a meeting, and you gave me an 8, can you tell me what can get me a 9 next time? What can I change just to put 1 mark higher? Instead of being, well, you gave me an 8, so what does that mean? It's just too open, and sometimes you don't have the trust. So building the trust to actually receive feedback is open once you start to address your biases and work on them. Constant practice of evaluating and fine-tuning inclusive leadership approaches based on those feedbacks. So a lot of organizations that I have worked with, they ask for feedback. They have like storage rooms filled with feedback surveys. And when I ask them, what happens once you've read the feedback? They're like, well, we just know how they're feeling. Okay. And they put it in a data report and they're like, hey, look, everyone's doing great. And if they're not doing great, what are the changes that you've put? It's like, oh, well, it's not a priority right now. We have other fires to put out. So you're making your staff take time to respond to this survey. You're trying to get their feedback on what operations are running, whether leadership is working. And then you do nothing with the feedback that you get because it's not a priority. What message does that send to your staff? What was the point of putting up this work? So when you address your biases, you try to also understand why are the priorities that we have number ones, and why are other things not a priority at all at the moment? Sometimes it's operational, sometimes it's you don't have the resources, but beyond that, what would it take to get those to become priorities? What would it take to get people's needs addressed at the top of your list? Those are questions you need to ask. And when you do start addressing your biases, what you start doing is that it ultimately creates the room for culture change work, because you are now not looking down, you're not looking down from your chair and being like, okay, everything's going well. You're actually at the ground level with everybody. And you're like, okay, let's do better. Let's move forward. So when we talk about data and how do we evaluate well-being in our staff, and how does your bias as someone who's writing up how to do this data collection, how does that work? What does that do? And accessibility looks different now. So when you want to actually ask people how they're doing, post-COVID, we have to be very aware that accessibility looks very different. When we ask people to like, hey, you know what, we don't want to do hybrid. I think that we're all ready to just come back to work like we were 2 years ago. We're just going to get back to it. We can do it. You're neglecting about how in the past, in a lot of organizations, only the majority of the people who were able to come to work and it worked for and like all of their accessibility needs were met, they were able to fully participate. And the minority of the people maybe who have challenges to actually get to work, who have to commute for 2 hours every day, and they have family home, like they have a family at home waiting for them, they have other responsibilities, they had less accessibility to show themselves and to show up at work. Zoom and video conferencing let people who are experiencing, like, who are living with disability still to their full potential show up to work because they didn't have to have a special transportation take them to their work. They could phone it in, they can attend everything, and they were still very effective at their jobs. So it's only after thinking that, oh, now the majority of the people need this, that we will invest and make this happen. But the minority of the people who are still working for you have had these needs forever, but they were never important enough, or their needs were never surfaced. So you have to think about, if we have given them all of this work, all of these, benefits during the pandemic, how are we going to take it away and force people now to come back to work and be like, figure it out? You used to do it before. Is that fair? Like, can we do that? Then flexibility is pivotal, not just in schedule, but it's also about how people use the resources that you've put up. When we think about the last 2 years, mental health crises have never seen this spark. So many people are going through so many different levels of mental health issues and like struggling to even find a service care provider. So when we talk about how they can actually cope with having gone through this and then showing up to work and doing their work, going to the office, spending time with other people, getting over people anxiety, there are so many different barriers that are unseen that we can't judge. So how do we make sure that flexibility is also at the center of how we're inviting people together again, inviting people to come back? So stop sending repetitive yes/no surveys to quantify employee well-being. Are you happy here? What does that mean? Explain. Yes, no, great. What do you do with that? What do you do with that answer? Do you put it on a chart being like 70% said yes, they are happy, 30% said no. So majority, you're happy, great, let's move on. Instead of doing those yes/no surveys, actually start asking questions that digs deeper and requires more time and trust to answer. So do the dirty work. Do not the dirty work, but do the actual hard work. Do something that's hard. Is try to see how are you building those relationships with your staff, with your teams, and convey a way to train your staff to be more trusting and be more inclusive so that they can have between themselves also a trusting environment to have these conversations, and that they're not, criticism or opposing challenges is not seen as, oh my God, you're going to lose your job because you badmouthed the company. It actually comes in a point where we're like, wow, your feedback is actually really valuable. We did not see that we were doing this, but thank you for bringing that to our attention. Let's see how we can actually workshop this into moving forward, right? How do we address this? So questions, sorry, I went a little too forward. Questions like asking yourself when you're developing these surveys and you want to know more about your employees, questions like, how are your employees identifying with the work that they are doing in your organization? Are they at the right place right now at the right time? How have their experience been? How have you seen their experience going so far? What does their performance look like? And why is it like this? And not just because, well, that's just their attitude. They're lazy. No, think about more. How are they identifying with this work? Do they have they tapped their skills? Do they need a challenge? Do they need to move on? Do they need to try something new? It's not just about, I don't like my job. It's just maybe I don't like what I'm doing right now, but I do love working here. How many of them have access to benefits that take into account their personal situations and can accommodate for changes like health issues, loss of a relative, or going back to school? Do you talk about that openly? Is that something that people discuss and can share resources on? Is it something that you are able to provide, or take it up with your board or with your insurance company and see that if that's possible, because it's a prevalent need and you hear it and you see it and people are trusting you with this information? Can you make this happen? And will we be studying the benefits of a hybrid model and take the load off of peers who spend significant time of their days traveling to and from the office. Those are like big needs that parents and caretakers have, is that we miss so much of our lives commuting to work and being at work that we don't see our home lives unfolding. And the privilege of having to be at home is to see what that looks like when we're on the road or in the office. What does life look like here as well? How do you then tell them, all right, pack it up, let's go back to the office, right? Like, how does that make sense? And what do they feel about that? So now I'm gonna give you 10 minutes. So before we started today, you were given a PDF with questions on them. You were sent them by email. And they had these questions in the first part of it, biases. And I want to send you off into breakout groups. And you will be no more than 5 people. And I want you to take the time to share amongst yourselves what your reflection is to these questions. So what are some reinforced beliefs that you or your leadership have that may go against your DEI values? Maybe name your DEI values. What are they in your organization? What are your personal ones too? How do you develop these beliefs? What made you feel this way? Why are these beliefs so hard to let go of? And this is like challenging your inner biases. Like, you do have to think about it from yourself, like, and don't feel there's no shame in having biases. Again, everybody does have them, but take the time to think about, where did this bias come from? And what support or teachings are missing right now to do the internal work of unlearning some of these biases that go against your DEI values that you want to uphold or that you say you uphold? And the next is, how are your actions and your behaviors demonstrating your core values? So your biases sometimes, if you reflect on them, may go against your values, but what are some things that you are doing that are upholding your values, that are really demonstrating your core values? So Bradley, you're gonna send our participants off into their breakout groups. So you have 10 minutes. And I would like for one of you to be appointed the note taker. When we will return, the note taker will give us snippets of what was said in each of the groups. Everybody's good? Can we get a show of hands if we got it? We understand? We're ready? Get a thumbs up to your reactions.
Yeah, I've signed all the breakout rooms, so I'll go ahead and start opening them. Yeah, in the email we sent out, there's a worksheet as well, and you can also find it in the chat as well.
We'll drop the questions in the chat as well. Perfect.
All right, I'll go ahead and start opening the rooms.
Go ahead.
You should see a prompt to join the room if you have not already.
I don't see one.
No, you don't have all right. I will move you to
Thank you.
room 1. Do you see the prompt now?
So everyone just click on your prompt to enter your breakout room. think the last few people, maybe they weren't added. Like some of them were trickling in while we were making the breakout rooms, I think.
They're added. I don't know, Ollie, Diana, Eric, Munir, Bishop Carcano. I don't know if maybe they're away from the computer for a bit. They stepped aside.
All
Are you able to join them?
right, let me see. Okay, so the breakout groups. All right, some of them are full. That's good. They've started, I hope. Maybe Bradley, what you can do is just move them in. Okay, room 2 is everybody who's here. They haven't joined.
Yeah, I don't, you're not able to. They have to like accept the prompt. Yeah.
Gotcha.
They joined.
Okay, so they have like 6 to 7 more minutes. Did you
Yeah.
put a timer on the top for them?
Well, we said 10 minutes. It didn't give an option, but I mean, I kept track
Oh.
of time. It should close at around 10, so I can close
Perfect.
the rooms around then. Okay. Hi, Clelia. Thank you for joining us. You joined us. We're having a breakout room session right now. If you'd like to, it can move you to a room and you can be part of that discussion. There's some guiding questions that you can see on the slide right now. And yeah, I'll drop you into a breakout room and you can discuss with the rest of the people there.
Maybe just put the worksheet back in the chat for those who just arrived.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Welcome, Renee, as well. I will also drop you into a breakout room as well. You can see the PDF file for the questions as well as on the slides right now that are guiding some of the discussions in the breakout rooms right now. I will move you into a room right now. And I think, talking about, you're able to see the rooms as well, and I think you can join in as well.
Yeah. I'm gonna go to room 1, see how that's going. So can everybody see the screen? Okay, perfect. So when we talk about culture, the culture is the invisible and visible norms, rules, and power dynamics that shape the experiences and relationships of people in a workplace. The culture is impacted by and can impact the leadership styles that people take up when they move up the ladder, but also when they they interact with each other. A lot of people, like, you take on leadership roles when you mentor, when you guide. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm your boss, right? And so I like to use the metaphor, the Freud metaphor of the iceberg when we talk about culture, because of how group conscious, like what is in the group consciousness and what is in the group unconsciousness, really plays a role in how leaders create an inclusive practice. And the reason why is, in this metaphor, when we see the iceberg at the top, that's what everyone is aware of. That's the information we all have. And then when we have the waterline, under the waterline, it's all of the stuff that personally we know, but we don't have it in the surface. Not everyone is aware of these things. So when we look at this at the company level, we can think about what's at the top in the group consciousness is maybe like what's the website look like, group consciousness, everybody gets an email, everybody gets like, oh, this is our website, this is our office. It's what do we know as a group in the organization. And then under it, we can have like things that our colleagues are going through at home that they don't talk about, but they bring that emotional charge to work, and it kind of dictates how they do their work. It also is decisions that are being made and information that's being kept by leadership that isn't conveyed to the rest of the staff, right? So the culture that we create depends on where the waterline is. Is it really high so that only the top, the leadership, the governance, they know what's going on, and they have a very tight hold on what's being shared with the rest of the teams, the rest of the org? If the vision of the 10-year vision, the 5-year vision of the path that they're going to go towards as a service provider, as a nonprofit organization, for-profit company, whatever, is that idea, that vision only known to the people at the top? Or is the waterline thoughtfully lowered more and more, so collectively your staff, your executives, your public, like the public that you interact with, everyone is aware of what's going on, what decisions are being made, what are they fueled by, and what are you working towards, right? So a lot of the times, when we hear, oh yeah, these decisions were made, but it's a need to know basis, then you have to think about, what do I need to do to need to know this, right? Like why are we keeping this information? What's at what cost do we keep this information in? And what are the benefits of actually sharing it? And the cost can't be, well, people are not going to like it. They're not going to understand. If that is your rationale as a leader to sharing information, then the possibility is that you are not ready to actually listen to other opinions, to perspectives that challenge why you took this decision. You're not ready to make yourself vulnerable enough to reflect, like, hey, you know what? I did take this decision and maybe I was wrong. Maybe we took it a little too fast. Maybe we should go back a little bit, hear everyone out, brainstorm a little bit, and then go forward. Consciously and slowly, but also with grace, when you put the waterline down and include more perspectives, and you invite people to share their opinions and challenge you, and you see those challenges as an opportunity to grow, to come back better, to have better ideas and solid foundations. When you do that, you're creating this culture towards more inclusivity, towards stronger backbones, towards better trust, better bridges of trust and connectivity within your staff, within your team, but also with the public that you serve. So when we talk about difficult. Let's see, can we get there? Yes. So when we talk about leadership, when we're at the top and the peak and the water line is very high, and we want to keep those information and those decisions to ourselves, we're experiencing a leadership that is driven by a power over the rest of the staff kind of attitude. We want to limit the space for feedback. I don't want to hear it. I already took my decision. I don't want to hear it. It's too late to change. We're already set the course. At the boardroom, we already made our decision. I'm sorry, you're just going to have to follow. The water line is very, very high. We can't share this information with you because it's need to know. This is confidential. You're a part of the company. You are working towards the mission, but you don't need to know where we're headed. And my way or the highway approach. If you don't like it, you can quit. You're replaceable. Those kind of attitude, that kind of like rhetoric, narrative within an organization, like who's going to trust you? Like who's going to want to work for that, right? Unless you're at the top, then you have all the power. And when you shift that, when you start to recognize your biases, why am I like this? Why can't I share this power? Why can't I be more open to opinions? When you start asking key questions, what if we can move backwards? What if we can hit pause and wait to get a little bit more feedback, then take better decisions? Investing in personal growth. Get your mentors. Ask yourself these questions. Get a seminar, go get those resources, learn. When you foster strong relationships, you trust others and you give your trust to them. You give them more agencies and you let them open up and you give them a plan of how you're going to use the information they just gave you, the questions they just asked you, to benefit them in return. And you start seeing conflict as an opportunity mindset. You change your mindset from, I don't want to hear conflict because I don't want you to say that you're not in agreement with me. And then you actually take that conflict as an opportunity. That's when you start to move towards the power with model of leadership, where you understand everyone has something to offer. You may take the decision, but it will never just be because I thought of it in the back that one day and then I'm going to do it. It's taking into account who's not in the room right now as we're discussing this. How can we include a little bit more feedback? Because everyone seems to be saying the same thing, but I want to see a perspective I haven't heard of. Do you go look for that perspective? And if so, you're giving power to these people. You're sharing your power. You're intentionally making space for feedback. You're lowering the water line progressively and consciously. And you are active listening. You listen actively and you collaborate when you do problem solving. And that's how you move towards an inclusive leadership that will reinforce and always work towards an inclusive culture that you're building. So one of the things that happens when you don't have an inclusive culture is that you have resistance. And resistance is not a bad thing. Resistance, as Arnold Mindell put it, it comes in going from covert resistance you don't see to overt, where resistance is like in front of you. And as time progresses and you don't recognize these symptoms and you don't act on it, you don't call people in and try to see why, where the needs are, what is the root cause of the issues that we're having, then the intensity of resistance just gets higher and higher. So something that may start with you rolling out a new protocol without consulting anyone, and you're like, that's it, that's how it's going to go. I think it's a fantastic idea. I read it in a report last week, and I think this is going to be great. No one else was in the room when you made this decision, and now it applies to everyone. At first, as you're rolling it out, you can hear, jokes from your staff and your employee and your teammates, like just harmless jokes. And then you're like, oh, it's fine, it's just a joke. And then you go to sarcasm. Then it builds to excuses. Oh, I didn't follow this protocol because, I was late. My alarm didn't ring. I couldn't make the switch to 7 a.m. meetings instead of 9 a.m.s. Lobbying is when you have private chats and they just talk about like, I don't understand. Why is this happening? Like, this is not a good idea, but they never talk to the leader. They just talk amongst themselves. Then you have communication breakdown. They don't answer emails. They don't answer your calls. Goes to disruption. They slow down their work because they're like, I'm not going to give you this report until the last minute. I'm sorry, I'm just going to slow everything down. Slowly and slowly, they turn into strikes. They turn into the withdrawal. People, when they're not happy, when they don't agree, there's something missing, they're not connected, the resistance becomes very strong. And there's symptoms. The resistance itself is not a problem. It's the symptom of a bigger problem that you have to address if you want to remain inclusive. And you have to call them in. This is an opportunity for you to actually stop, reflect, like, okay, let's ask those questions again. Did I include perspectives? Did I make sure that the needs that we know are there, or maybe we don't know are there, were addressed, were surfaced? What did I base my decision on? Who was in the room when this decision was made? And how do I remedy this now? How do I, if you mess up, and you will, and that's normal, how do you then go backwards, reopen the channels, build that trust again, bring people in like, hey, I really messed up. I'm sorry that I did that. I realized that that was a bad mistake. Can we start from ground zero? Can we just go into seeing why it works, why it doesn't? Can you help me as a leader, asking, can you help me make this a better transition for us, or build something that is better for all of us? I just want to hear what you have to say. And I'm sure we can walk out of this meeting with something that works for everyone, and that includes every kind of need that we need to address right now. So it's never too late to just be like, well, you know, nobody likes this idea, but it is cost efficient and we're just going to do it. And then you just keep plowing through the resistance, right? As a leader, your resistance can also be like, I don't want to hear it. Every time someone brings something to you, you just sarcastically make a joke and you move away. That can be your own resistance. So when you recognize, where am I as a leader? Where am I on the resistance line? Why am I there? What's causing me to act, to make up these excuses? What's causing me to disrupt, what's going on? And then you have to, again, open up, reflect, and talk to your staff members to try to repair that bridge. And you have to lead by example so that everyone can see that, okay, it's okay to apologize, back up, reconvene, and then move forward. You have to set that example, and you have to make it look like it's okay for them to do so. And by doing that and by prioritizing that, you're putting their psychological safety and your psychological safety at the top front, at the priority, to make sure that everybody does feel comfortable coming as themselves. They can bring their baggage, but it doesn't hinder the way that you connect with each other. So we had another reflection scheduled, but I think we're gonna, for the sake of time today, I do want you to think about these reflections that you have access to in the worksheet that we had sent before the webinar today. And they're really there to kind of, as a leader in any kind of leadership, you don't have to be the leader in your organization, but you are a leader at some point in your life. I want you to think about what are the key qualities that you look for in leadership, and if you are displaying them as well. Give an example of the behavior that depicts that quality. And have you made space for new and different perspectives? How did you do that? And when and how have you resisted a new perspective? So that's, it's not always nice to think about ourselves like, oh my God, we've resisted giving space to other people, especially if our values, if one of our values is, to be more inclusive, it's hard to think of us as doing something that's opposing the inclusivity, So that's really a very, that's a challenging introspection, but it is important if you want to participate in building a inclusive culture. So I I hope we take time to reflect on this, after we're done today, or even take the time to think about it right now, a little bit about what we talked about. How does it apply to you? How does it apply to even just if you're in a leadership position, if you're not in a leadership position, maybe you're someone who also doesn't work necessarily. You have a primary place of work, but also a secondary. So it's interesting to do the comparison of what you have experienced somewhere else versus where you are now. So that's important as well. One of the last things is going to be learning curves. How many of you, in the show of hands, have walked into a position where you had to hit the ground running right away? There was no time to actually have a training or someone like to mentor you or to shape you, and then you went into your role, but you actually were hired and okay, figure it out, just hit the ball running. How many of you, just a show of hands, either using an emoji or even if you're on camera, raising your hand to let us know that that is a situation that happened to you? Okay. Good. So I have been in this situation as well. They recruited for a long time. They hired after a very long time. And finally, they were like, we are at our capacity. We have been waiting for you to come in for a very long time. Can you make this happen right away? And in a leadership position, it's very hard to kind of channel your own learning as you're like, okay, I have to do this. I know some stuff, but there is a lot of organizational baggage that I don't know. So I have to learn and perform at the same time. So when you feel like that, and it's like, oh, it just happens, this is my first time, but sometimes it's not necessarily a feeling or a situation that goes away. As a leader, you are expected and you are brought in to lead, to do your own job. Like as a manager, you have your own tasks, but you also have to manage people, but you also have to hold a lot of space and information and resources in the organization. So how do you make sure that when you're managing people, when you're in charge of setting an example, that you don't forget that you yourself have learning and unlearning to do? It's not about like, I was hired in this position because I know everything. I can only tell and teach. I have no learning left to do. So when we embrace creative conflicts, that really shows that I have a lot to learn. If you're not agreeing with me, like, let's talk about it. What is there left for me to acquire to meet you where you are? But also it can be an invitation to whoever you're talking to, whether it be a peer, someone else who's a manager who leads another place, or someone who is on your team, for them to also have this discussion with you to see what training and what information and resources do they need to start seeing things from your perspective. What information, what resources do we both not have to meet each other halfway? So when we think about the iceberg, right? When we're in a meeting together and we're having opposing ideas, both of our icebergs, the waterline is very high. If I'm not sharing what's in my brain that's bringing me to make this decision, and I'm just telling you, but this is right, and you're opposing, and you're like, no, this is wrong, and we're not, both of us, lowering the waterline to give us more examples, more experience, and more sharing information, then we're not going to be actually moving towards something together. So creative conflicts are absolutely important and key into building a very strong and inclusive culture when we think about challenging opinions, brainstorm ideas, exploring different possibilities, and learn from each other within a framework of mutual respect. The other thing as a leadership, and specifically in a inclusive workplace where we do give value to emotional response, we do understand that depending on what people go through in their lives, they bring that to the forefront at work too with them, is how do you navigate affective conflicts? And that's when things get personal. So conflicts that arise from personal or personality incompatibility, right? It exacerbated even more after 2 years of online connections versus in-person connections to team members now. So when you're with someone and you can't differentiate whether you agree or disagree with someone because it's a bad idea or because you don't like someone because you don't feel connected to them. And when we're always working in a note where like everybody's working in their own department, in their own project, and they have no idea what's happening in other places, in other perspectives, then it almost becomes a personal attack when you tell them you don't like their work. And as a leader in an inclusive space, we have to be able to navigate what is personal and move away from these are in the workspace. We're not going to create space to attack personally. So fundamentally, when we're coming with feedback, with critique, and we're asking you to change something, it really is because we're coming in understanding that there is something you overlooked in this idea you're proposing, not because we don't like you. So how do you get to that part? How do you work? What questions can you ask to make sure that as we're building this culture, as we're building trust, we're building these bridges, our employees, our staff, us as leaders also come into this place understanding that our conflict is creative and it's going towards solving problems and it's only achievable together. And leave the personal attacks and feeling personally triggered aside, or knowing how to be able to address them respectfully within the team as well. So that is the time that we have today. I hope that you've either learned something today or have some perspectives and tools that you can reuse in your workplace, that you can share with your teams, but you can share with your peers as well. So maybe in the chat before we leave, you can kind of drop how you're leaving with what we've talked about, whether it's anxious, and if so, about what. Focused, if there's a part of this presentation today that you want to focus on and develop more on, I would love to know what it is. Hopeful, will some of this work, or like if some things that you've been able to think about real life situations that bring you hope in your work, what that is, so we can all use some hope. And what are you curious about now walking out of this webinar today? So take like a minute in the chat, if you will, to just jot down what is going on in your head. Are you anxious? Are you focused, hopeful, curious? I see some curious and hopeful. Curious and hopeful. That's so fun to see hopeful a lot. That's really reassuring. Anxious to learn more. Yeah. Learning curves, like I think definitely for everybody, your work experience is, as any experience, what you make of it. And it's also the tools that you bring to it, but the tools that you also go and get in order to face your experience. So for everybody to have access to professional development, to bettering, to knowledge work that happens outside of the company, sometimes you don't have the time or the resources to do so, but it is very interesting to have those insights to come back and do your work. However, as a company, another thing that makes a company very inclusive is paid professional development, the ability to make sure that your staff can participate in inclusive practices and inclusion building is to invite them to also educate outside of the company and bring that knowledge back inside and share with everybody. So that for sure is very important as well. It's a key element that us staff members, but it can do on our own. But it does have to come from, the perk is when it comes from the company, you know that they're invested in making sure that you can come as your best selves to this work as well. What's the same, what's different, or what's the same in what was presented? Professional development and responsibility to become stronger contributor. Yes, so Nicholas, I absolutely agree. It is a personal response. It's an individual responsibility. But the reality is that, well, today, especially in the last 2 years, personal development, when it comes to taking free webinars, it's very accessible nowadays. And especially when it comes to inclusive practices and DEI, there are a lot of like books, audiobooks, podcasts, online threads, email lists that you can all get there. People are pouring this content into the internet, so you have readily access to it. What is more important is if you do have, however, a HR department that has DEI practices at the center and as a priority within the organization, then them having access to a list of all of these opportunities that their staff can get to and to better their education as well. As a mentor, I know that a lot of the people that I mentor in the beginning, the first thing is, I don't know what I don't know. And that is absolutely true. If your organization is going to take a step towards making sure that they're more inclusive, they can't do it just leadership down. They have to model inclusivity, but they have to invite everyone to come in and participate. And one of the ways is to share the information that they have at the top with everyone so they can themselves get that knowledge and education and training as well. And it always helps if it's paid for and supported by the company as well. If not, free alternatives are also important to be shared. So thank you so much for your questions and also for your collaboration and the time you took today to come out and be a part of this webinar. I really wanted to thank everybody to take your morning and yeah, getting to know each other in the groups and being such great audience.